Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. Welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, where we celebrate food and honor those who champion the cause of food in society.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, a show where we're talking about issues in food and agriculture, normally hosted by Abdul-Rahim Abdulai, and today hosted by me, your co-host, Emily Duncan. And this week, we're continuing on our series, talking to graduate students who have participated in the Food from Thought Research Assistance Program. These groups of students have been working for 8 months on different projects with community partners. And this research assistance program is through the Food from Thought Research Program and also through the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. And so I'm really excited to talk to another group of students this week. So we're just going to get right into it, and I'm going to let our guests introduce themselves.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting myself and my group to the show, and I'm happy to be sitting in as a guest today. My name is Abdul-Rahim Abdulai. I'm actually a PhD student at the Department of Geography, Environment and Geomatics here at the University of Guelph. And my general research interest is mainly in agriculture and food security. Broadly, I look into digital agriculture technologies and how they impact society.
And I'm Victoria Lesy. I'm also a member of the Climate Change Group. I am a master's student in the Molecular and Cellular Biology Department, and I do a lot of research on plant genetics, specifically the underlying plant biology that is responsible for controlling flowering.
I'm Matt Orton. I'm a PhD candidate right now in bioinformatics in Sally Adamowicz's lab, and my research focuses on analysis of DNA barcoding data and developing software tools.
Awesome. It's so great to have you guys here today to talk about your group project. And you also have 2 other group members. This is one of the biggest groups of this year's cohort, right? So you're a group of 5. So I know Abigail and Nicole couldn't be on the show today, but we're excited to have you 3 here talking. And it sounds like from your backgrounds, you all come from very diverse academic backgrounds and are all kind of studying different research topics, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're looking to talk about, what brought this group of students together today, and what your project was for the Food from Thought Research Assistance Program. So Victoria, you alluded to that you're part of the climate change group. What does that mean?
So our community partner is the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario, also known as the EFAO. And they had a project that they wanted us to look at farmers' perceptions on climate change, as well as how farmers are mitigating the effects on the farm level that climate change and stresses like that are causing them. For myself, I was most interested in this project because I do come from a farming background. My parents farm about 1,000 acres down in Blenheim, Ontario, and I see firsthand the stress that my dad has, especially in regards to like weather and markets, and I wanted to get a little more involved in that and learn a little bit more from other farmers, especially around like the Guelph area, and as well as like smaller scale farmers who are doing ecological practice, and see how they are combating it.
That's really interesting. It sounds like this research project had a real kind of personal tie
Absolutely.
For you. Matt, what drew you to working with this climate change group?
So what drew me to this particular group was there was a pretty substantial data analysis component in terms of looking at all of the weather station data across Ontario. And our community partner, Thorsten Arnold, was very enthusiastic about me doing development of a software app that can do weather station data analysis. And because I'm really into software development right now, I was really interested in taking on that project. So
that's really awesome that you were able to, bring in your own research skill set, working with software and data analysis into this kind of more applied project. Abdul, why did you choose this climate change group?
Generally, I would say it had a personal and academic point of view. From my personal point of view, I come from a farming background, so which has informed my interest in everything I do. I'm always interested in understanding what farmers go through on an everyday basis and their experiences with whatever natural phenomenon it is, be it climate or even unnatural things like, let's say, the markets forces and stuff. So from the academic background, like I mentioned, I've always been studying farming, dealing with farmers. I kind of did my master's talking to farmers in Newfoundland, and when I came here, and I realized my research was still going to continue in that same line of talking to farmers and trying to understand their experiences. So seeing this project, I thought as well this would be a very good entry point for me to go into the farming community within Ontario. So I kind of said, okay, let me join this group and see what I can learn out from it. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and it sounds like you guys, I know a little bit about your project, but for listeners, I think to start, let's talk a little bit more about the community partner, the Ecological Farmers of Association of Ontario, EFAO. So what does this group actually do, and what was it like working with them?
So they're actually a not-for-profit organization, and all of the people who kind of are in charge of it are farmers themselves, and they do this kind of as like a part-time job. They all felt very strongly about ecological agriculture, which consists of protecting our natural resources, supporting the surrounding biodiversity and the existing biodiversity, and mitigating climate change. And so this organization kind of came together to support and connect local farmers using farmer-led research, as well as providing advisory services, soil health programs, and many conferences throughout the year.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're a pretty busy group. If they're a group of farmers who are also maintaining the farm on the side, but then also engaging with these types of research projects too. And then so when you kind of first got together and met with the FAO, what did you kind of work out with this community partner of what would be the scope of your project? Like what were the main kind of goals that you were hoping to achieve through the course of this research?
Okay, so generally after we got together, as you mentioned, we were the largest group among the 5 groups that worked on the food from thought research projects this year. So we got together, we had a first meeting with our community partner just to familiarize ourselves with what they do and trying to understand what our direction would be going forward. So after during the first meeting, we discussed like so many things that came out that we needed to talk to farmers, like in terms of interviewing them and carrying out a survey to get like their experiences of what they go through in their interaction or everyday practices and how climate change affects that. And the other aspect was that we needed to dig deep into weather information. So we needed to go online, search for climate data for the past 10 years and trying to analyze what has been the rainfall patterns, what has been the temperature patterns, in order to come out with a tool that will help farmers make informed decisions. Because one of the things that we kind of noticed was that in as much as there's always like data, the data was not so accessible to the farmers, and the format in which the data is always provided doesn't really help farmers in making informed decisions. So we divided the project into 2 parts. We had a group of students that's focused on interviewing farmers and conducting a survey to collect the experiences, and we had another group that was more into data wrangling. So digging deep, getting a lot of data from Environment Canada and AgriCorp, which Matt will be able to talk more about because he has done so much work with the data and he has been able to come out with like an app, web-based app that will help farmers in making decisions. So this was like the 2 streams we approach the entire project.
Yeah, okay. Thanks for giving that overview of the project. It sounds like there's really, that kind of one side of it where it's talking to farmers and understanding those perceptions about climate change, but then actually looking at some of that information and trying to make it more accessible to farmers. Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that side of things. I know, Matt, you alluded to how to make that data more accessible through developing software and a web-based app. So what was that process like when you first got that data? What were some of the challenges with it?
So there are quite a few challenges with the, as Abdul said, the data wrangling aspect of it. Firstly, AgriCorp, they're not willing to share their temperature data, so all we had was precipitation data, and then they didn't want to share their station locations. So we only had kind of a rough idea of where their stations were actually scattered throughout Ontario. And then with Environment Canada, what we noticed is there were a lot of significant gaps in terms of, like, some years there just wouldn't be any data at all for a certain weather station in Ontario. So that there was this big, at the beginning there was this really big challenge in the data wrangling aspect and just getting everything in a nice format that we could then import over to a software app. And so I spent me and Nicole, who were both on the data team, spent a lot of time with the data formatting, data wrangling, and then once we had that finished, we started. Well, I guess I more so started with the development of this app, and basically, what this app does is it just makes the data easily accessible in as opposed to actually going to the Environment Canada website and sifting through, like, you have to go month by month, but with our app you can go it aggregates all of the data, so you can go year by year, and you can it gives you a map of all the different stations, so you can see what station you're closest to and then get plotted temperature and precipitation data for the station that is most applicable to where you're located. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a really useful app. And it sounds like it was a good learning experience for you as researchers. I think sometimes we assume that, you'll get the data, it'll be just what you need to make something useful, but it sounds
not
like
in this case.
Definitely not. There was a lot of efforts in kind of cleaning and fixing and making sure you had all the right things together.
Right. And also I should mention the whole purpose behind this app is for, specifically, this is designed for farmers to be able to use, to be able to find a station that's closest to their farm and then see if, the weather data we have on this app kind of corroborates with their experiences on their farm with changes in climate that are going on right now. So,
okay. I see. Yeah. It's those two things working together of, like, the farmers' personal experiences and knowledge about climate, but then also how it matches up with the data that you've received.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool. And so in working with partnership with the EFAO and working with farmers themselves in cooperation to develop the app, how did you find that experience of, you know a lot about data management and software development, and they know a lot about the personal experience on the farm and what the information they need to get out of it. What were some of the experience of working together to make sure that what you were making was actually what they needed?
So I didn't interact with the farmers directly. I did interact with our community partner, Thorsten Arnold, and he is a farmer himself. So he gave me a lot of useful feedback in developing the app. He was kind of the perfect person to talk to because he's a farmer, but he also has a background in data science and data analysis. So he was able to give really useful design tips in terms of the interface of the app and how the app should, it should be user-friendly and it should be really easy for them to use. And so he gave a lot of useful feedback on that. But I actually didn't really interact with the farmers like Victoria or Abdul did. So.
it sounds like, the community partner was really key in being an advocate for knowing what the farmers needed from this app, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'd just like to remind listeners again that you're listening to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 in Guelph, Ontario. And today we're continuing our Food from Thought series, talking to the research assistants about their projects. And we've been talking to the climate change group today. And so we've had a great discussion about one part of the project, looking at some of the data analysis for the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. But I'm also really curious to hear some of the results of what were farmers' perceptions about climate change when you interviewed them, and how are they experiencing some of the differences in climate that are happening?
Yeah, so like Abdul said, there were two parts to kind of like qualitative analysis side. There was the interviews where we documented like personal stories, and we actually wrote articles about that, as well as the survey. So these surveys really gave us a solid foundation on like what farmers are thinking. So a lot of people said that, yep, climate change is very significant and is of importance to farmers. It's also affecting their operation and changing the way they farm. A lot of people also said that they found that weather patterns are becoming much more variable every year, and rainfall seems to be more isolated rather than widespread throughout an area. Like, we had some people who said, like, oh, my neighbor who's literally like 2 houses down had like an inch of rain, but me here, I maybe got like a tenth. Like, it's hardly anything. And a lot of people kind of had those similar stories too. And what's also really interesting is pretty well everybody agreed that yes, climate change has caused them like drastic emotional stress, and it's having a huge impact not only on their families, but maybe their relationships with their cropping advisors or people that they look on for advice.
Wow, those are some pretty big results. You know, I think that in a lot of cases, in general, we think about climate change as something that's, you can't always see it happening, or it's happening over this large scale, but farmers are people whose livelihoods depend on the weather and that predictability of that. And as it becomes more unpredictable, that is a huge source of stress. Those were some of the results of the surveys. I'm interested of like, what were maybe some of the stories that came out of those personal interviews with farmers?
So we conducted, I believe, 6 interviews with different farmers all throughout Ontario. And just some of the quotes that came out of this, for instance, was Christine Hamill, who's from Allenford, Ontario, actually said that there doesn't seem to be any sort of moderate or average anymore. You can't look at precipitation averages or temperature averages. You need to look at what's going on a day-to-day basis in order to actually kind of like adapt and adjust and maybe change what you're going to do for that day so that your crop does still survive or still has like a good yield. Another quote that was really like resonating and that came directly from the interviews was, "It sprinkles constantly, which will spoil the crops, but it isn't actually enough to feed your crop." And that was from Gerald Poachman from Walkerton, Ontario. And that's another like really interesting thing that we, that not only he said it, but a few other people said it too, is that, okay, sure, it'll rain and it'll show on like your normal weather app that, okay, it's going to rain, and it did rain, but did it actually rain enough to give your crop some water to drink to actually grow? And so that was cool. One last quote that I wanted to highlight on was from Brent Preston, who's from Creemore, Ontario, and he said that, "I think when dealing with climate change or any other issue for sustainable farmers, the community is really important." And that's really like a great quote, especially because like that's the whole purpose of the EFAO coming together, is because they wanted to build this sense of community and kind of like a neighborly relationship with other farmers who are having like the same ecological practices, to kind of like provide a resource for people to understand and learn from each other.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and I know that farmers are really reliant on those networks for sharing experiences and supporting each other through challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the main objectives of the project was actually to help farmers like build that sense of community. And like Victoria mentioned, the whole idea behind EFAO is like create that community where farmers who share the similar values or like same values actually come together to share knowledge. And with regard to our project, with what we've done by bringing the experiences of farmers like all across Ontario, it's like one of the first steps in actually creating that sense of community. So by writing stories about each farmer and how they experience climate change variedly, we are able to like help other farmers across the province and even beyond relate to some of these stories, so that farmers will like actually know that I'm not going through this all alone. There are others who are going through maybe similar things that I'm going through, and this is how they are dealing with it. So maybe I could also try this kind of strategies in order to deal with the situation. So it's all about like community building within the farm system or the farming community as well.
And to build on that, so some of the actual strategies that they employed to become more resilient to climate change included things like investing more in irrigation infrastructure, whether that's putting in a pond or perhaps putting in irrigation lines to water their crops. A lot of people said that they did that now. Another important thing was all about diversification. So they, instead of just growing like strawberries or something in a greenhouse, they also had some like outdoor crops like corn, or maybe even added animals to their farm like poultry, in order to combat not only like climate change, but perhaps like changing markets due to climate change. A few other things that they said is they now use cover crops, as well as improving microclimate, and using different varieties of crops, whether they're more resilient to climate change or just have better yields, or more resistant to disease that happens. That was just another thing that they employed to be resilient.
Yeah, another part of it is with regards to diversification. Apart from just the on-farm practices and changes in order to adapt, people go beyond just the farm to explore other ventures. Like there are other people who diversify by now beginning to like offer workshops to people who want to do gardening, like so, and other measures that like they do put in place. It's all about how to survive in one way or the other. So even on the farm or even beyond the farm.
Yeah, it sounds like they're using all kinds of different strategies and really having to change their business in quite a number of ways to adapt to a changing climate. It's really interesting that your project has really highlighted the different ways that farmers are doing that and trying to build that support network. What are kind of the next steps for the project? How can people learn more about these stories, or how can farmers access the weather-based app?
Oh, yeah, sure. So for the weather-based app, it's just a website URL you can navigate to, and in theory, the app should just open up and you should be able to use it. It's just still a little buggy, so but it does generally work. So it's just a URL you can go to, and maybe I can provide that to you guys. Or do you want me to do it now? Or
I believe it'll be on the EFAO website if you go to their blog.
Okay.
It should be posted there, yeah.
Yeah. And so what I've told the EFAO is they can continue to use the app if they want to, but that they would need to cover the server costs for running the app from now on. So. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, if farmers want to like learn more about this, the app will be featured on the FAO website. And then what about these stories that you guys have written, or the results of the survey?
Yes. So just before we move to where to find it, I think, Victoria, it's important for us to highlight what the ways forward is, like in terms of what the farmers said. What should we do next in terms of helping farmers adapt to climate change?
Yeah, for sure. So that was another question that we asked in the survey and in the interview, and a lot of people thought that on-farm research was really important. And this is because there's a lack of local understanding regarding the actual practical impacts of adapting to climate change and production management and personal effects for these ecological farmers. So they really liked the on-farm research program that the EFAO provides, and they want to continue supporting that and continue participating and learning from that as well. Another thing that they thought would be really good to do is perhaps lobbying to help policymakers better understand the actual impacts of climate change and how it's having an effect on farmers. Another thing that they also wanted to see a little more of was university research. which is excellent, as well as perhaps building markets that better support the viability of their production, or perhaps building these community chains so that they can sell their produce to like a restaurant directly or something along those lines.
Yeah, so just to add another thing, one thing that came out very strongly in the interview had to do with collaboration among actors. So most farmers alluded to the fact that there's a lot going on right now. Like Omafra is doing a lot of programs, the University of Guelph is doing a lot of research, farmers are doing their own research, like organizations like the EFAO are doing research, but there's very limited collaboration among like these actors. So to be able to have a very holistic approach to climate change, it's important to find measures or strategies that will bring all these stakeholders who have this common interest together in order to like find ways of like discussing what is happening, how do we move forward, and also to like kind of sync their what I call is disconnected or like disjoint strategies right now together. So that is an important thing that we need to take note of going forward. We need to make sure that like stakeholders that are working towards the same goal are able to communicate and coordinate well.
Yeah, I think that's an important message, that there's so many different people who are looking at this issue from different sides. Farmers are experiencing it. At the university, we're conducting research on these things. We're gathering data, and your project, it seems, has tried to bring those all together and try to put those voices, bring farmer voices to the forefront, but also give them a tool to better understand what's happening in terms of climate change. What do you think has been the most valuable aspect of for you for participating in this project?
Well, for me, I didn't really know anything about the agricultural sciences or climate change before starting this project, so it's really opened my eyes, I guess, to a lot of different issues that are facing farmers in regards to climate change. So
I thought it was really interesting, like the lengths that these farmers would go to in order to protect their crops or protect their animals. Like, for instance, we had one farmer that we talked with that said that his poor chickens in the summer would get so hot, even though they'd be allowed outside, they wouldn't want to go outside for whatever reason, perhaps because I don't know, the food and whatnot is inside, right? So he actually walked throughout the barn and would grab a chicken one by one and dunk them in a bucket of water just to cool them off, the poor birds.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting. I also thought from like a personal side is like my dad and my mom were commercial farmers, so I don't really know a whole lot about ecological farmers. So I did learn a lot more about like what they're doing and why that's important. And I'm going to try and kind of convert my parents maybe a little bit.
Yeah, so like Victoria, I always like worked with conventional farmers, like even like in my research. So like this was like a very big learning opportunity for me, and I've learned so much just trying to understand what they do and the experiences they go through, and people just farming in a different model compared to what we normally see.
It sounds like this has been a truly amazing learning experience, both for you as graduate students, but you've also produced some really, I think, important research results. And so just to kind of wrap up our show today, we've been talking with a group of students from the Food from Thought Research Assistance Program about their project partnered with the Ecological Farmers Association of Ontario. And they've produced some really great research on climate change in Ontario and how it's affecting farmers, both by looking at data and developing a web-based tool for farmers to be able to understand more about weather patterns near their farms, and by talking and interviewing farmers and surveying farmers about how climate change is affecting them. And so we know that climate change is a huge risk to our food and farming system. And so I'd say thank you for being here today and talking about this research. I think it's bringing an important issue to light. Yeah. And thank you again to our listeners for listening to another episode of Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 in Guelph, Ontario. I'm your co-host, Emily Duncan, and thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk. See you next week for another exciting edition.